I would like to ask you first if you think if there is a before and if there is an after Charlie Hebdo attacks, and especially for the Jews in France and perhaps in Europe, as well as, of course, for non-Jews in France. Is there a before and is there an after the hypercacher, the grocery store, the Jewish grocery store murders? So I'm going to begin this by showing you a couple of images, and I will invite you, if that's okay, if that's something that you do in those meetings or lectures, I'm going to ask you to give me your view and your interpretation of those images. The first one is the one that the whole world has seen, I suppose. Do you remember that picture, the post-Charlie attack cover, and how do you understand it? Of course, it's in French, but beyond that, what do you see? Do you understand the words? Everything is forgiven, tout est pardonné, and then, of course, the famous slogan, Je suis Charlie. So, who wants to give an interpretation of that? Not Alan. Everybody but you. Anyone wants to say something about it? How do you read it? Because actually there were very ambiguous, very ambivalent, very equivocal readings, and there is probably not a final meaning or interpretation of this particular picture. Okay. Well, we're in a Franciscan university, so maybe there is a certain Christian thematic that's not impossible as well, the forgiveness. And yes, especially that you see, of course, an image of the prophet and with the tears. And so that takes me back to another image, which was, so how do I do that? Okay, like this. All right. So this you may have seen or not. This is the Mahomet, the prophet. It was in 2006 image that triggered a huge scandal and outrage in 2006, and you see here, I translated up there what's written. Mahomet overwhelmed by Muslims fundamentalists. The stereotype is so much ingrained, right, in the culture of those young people that Jews must have money, and that we are going to get a rabbi. You know, that was their rational or their irrational. A rabbi is going to give a ransom, or the Jewish community is going to give a ransom for him, right? So that was a very important incident in 2006. And then the second one, was this picture, extremely poignant picture of that little girl, Myriam Monsenego, who was a victim in 2012 of Mohamed Merah in the city of Toulouse. Everybody has heard of that murder of children in a school yard at Beauportant. How do you say Beauportant? Point blank, exactly. So this little girl was murdered this way. And I have to say that these two events, and probably even more the Toulouse massacre, was a total shock for Jews, and perhaps a little less for the non-Jewish French community, to the extent that you did not see as much mobilization, if any mobilization at all, after those murders, and especially after the murders in Toulouse, as you did see the day after Charlie Hebdo massacre. So I think it says something, doesn't say that French people don't care about Jews. I would never say that, but it means that it was to an extent, at the unconscious level, more ordinary, more normal to kill Jews in France because Jews have, been victims of discrimination and violence for such a long time that it's almost something understandable. At the same time, some intellectuals, and I think there was Emmanuel Todd, on whom I'm going to come back later, said that the main reason why there was no such mobilization is that the Charlie Hebdo journalists were very well known and were legendary figure, right, in France, as opposed to anonymous Jews. I think it's kind of a lame excuse, but but I think it's something that came to the mind of certain. I don't think it was Emmanuel Todd. It was another one, but it doesn't really matter. So, in any event, this for the French Jews has been an incredible shock to lose. So, let's see what I've got here. Okay. So then came, of course, Charlie Hebdo, which was called by some commentators it's too close. Okay. The 9/11 of free speech. That was the expression, the phrase that was used at that time. And then, more recently, as you also know, came November 2015 and the random killing of people in a neighborhood of Paris, which is neighborhood that encapsulates or that sums up or that incarnates a certain kind of festive Paris that encapsulates and sort of embodies a certain individualistic modernity, right? And this was precisely the target of terrorism in November 2015. And then in November, it was when? It was a few months ago, right? In November, I would say that France somewhat realized that Jews were not the only target, right? That after all, the target was France as well. The target was Europe in general. And I would say the target was anything, anybody, any symbol, any people who could be perceived as the enemy, real enemy or imaginary enemy of radical Islam, and in that case of ISIS or ISIL in particular. All right. So it has sort of changed, I think, the game and the consciousness of the threat. By the way, you can interrupt me if you have. I like to invite you to intervene when I'm talking. So don't hesitate to. Yes, please go ahead.
I would just say Daesh instead of ISIS or ISIS.
Daesh, yes. Why do you want me to say Daesh?
Because I understand that is a non-preferred terminology.
That Daesh is the non-preferred terminology? So the French actually say
that's what they use.
They use Daesh. Daesh is the Arabic acronym for ISIS or ISIL. I am not sure that I understand the politics behind the reason why we would say ISIL, or some would say ISIS, and some would say, except that ISIS is a name of it's too nice of a name, right? And Daesh. But in any event, yes. Okay. Daesh, it hides the Islamic reference because it's the Arabic acronym, so it's less comprehensible. Okay. Okay. All right. So I would say my next point is to say, after having sort of reminded certain facts, my next point is to suggest that the Jews in France are not only physically targeted, but they are also, like last week, last Saturday, I just learned it from you actually, but they are also subjugated, I would say, to a symbolic form of violence. They are, in post-Charlie France, I see two rhetorical operations that affect the Jews. So what do I mean by symbolic violence? You know, we say symbolic violence, physical violence. What do I mean by symbolic violence? Someone? Well, I just mean that it's a kind of violence within words, a violence within language, a violence within rhetoric, right, as opposed to a physical type of violence. And I see two ways in which this symbolic violence expresses itself. The first way comes from certain intellectuals, certain scholars, public figures, who, like Enzo Traverso, who is professor of history at Cornell University. He is French, Italian actually, but he had a career, most of his career in France, in the French university. And Traverso argues that Islamophobia has replaced anti-Semitism, and that Jews, after the independence of Israel, have turned right, that is conservative or reactionary if you prefer, and that they have betrayed the values of Jewish universalism and of the revolutionary ideals that supposedly Judaism or Jewish identity or Jewish tradition is supposed to foster and to promote. I see it, yes, go ahead, please.
Are you saying they become targets because they're not upholding the Jewish religion as he or somebody else sees it?
Well, he wouldn't go as far as to justify Jews being a target of attacks, but he is bearing witness to he's bearing witness to a certain move toward what I would call soft apology, if you will, of terrorism, right? Because he sees, first of all, because as you can see, he sees that the pattern of hatred, that is of hatred of the Jews, has been replaced by another hatred, which is the hatred of Muslims and the hatred of Islam, which in a way I call it symbolic violence because it's a way of not recognizing that Jews are the primary targets of attacks, physical, murders, and so on in France, if not in Europe in general, clearly. So that's, one way of diminishing this problem. The second problem that you can see in this operation, if you will, is that it's a way of not recognizing that massively Jew hatred today comes from young Muslims. Yesterday we had a panel at the University of Minnesota with Gunther G. Kelly, who is a sociologist. I don't know if you know him. He's at Indiana University, and he just published a very interesting enquête or inquiry on young European Muslims who hate Jews. The title of his book is very controversial, as you can imagine. It's European Muslim anti-Semitism, and why young men in Europe hate Jews or something like that. So the problem you see with this sort of operation, as I call it, is that it takes away the Islamic, the Muslim or the radical Muslim component of Jew hatred. Does it make, did you see that, or am I the only one who sees that problem? Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Well, so the idea is that his conception of Jewishness is a diasporic conception, obviously, but not just diasporic. It's, I would say, a sort of idealization of Jews, right, as the harbingers, can you say that in English? Yeah, the harbingers of progress, the harbingers of revolution. Now, if according to his... Sorry?
Is one the same as the other? The harbingers of revolution and of progress, and that's not necessarily together.
Well, for the radical left, it's pretty much the same thing. In other words, yes, absolutely. Everything that is not revolutionary is reactionary from the perspective of the radical left, I would say. And Enzo Traverso belongs to this ideology, right? So, yeah, no, absolutely. So he does bring Israel into this. He, I don't know, well, maybe not in my summary. I'm sorry, I summarized the 300-page book in 4 lines. But he does bring, yeah. So his point, yes, his point is actually that when the Jews have a state, right, they become oppressors. Exactly, like everyone else. But in his idealization of Jewishness, right, because it is an idealization, it's a philo-Semitic idealization, in the same way as anti-Semites idealize or construe a sort of imaginary Jew, right, or a conceptual Jew. In the exact same way, you know, he imagined that as soon as there is a form of normalization, then his ideal is going to collapse, right? And that's exactly what happens. And that's this idea that Jews have now become the avant-garde, if I may say so, of reaction, the avant-garde of counter-revolution, of normalization, of assimilation. They are no longer this force of motion, of move, of progress, etc. And now what's interesting also is that Muslims take this role, because there is also in his argument a total idealization of Muslims and of Islam, right? Islam is taking is replacing Jewishness, whatever that means with quotation marks, in that sort of post-colonial idealization of the other. So the Jew was the other, now the Muslim is the other, and it's a good other as opposed to a racist. It's an anti-racist type of other. It's not the other of the racist. The racist is the other as something negative, and the other of the anti-racist is the other as something positive. However, both dehumanize this other, both idealize and essentialize the other. That's, you know, what I'm trying to I don't know if it makes any sense, but I'm trying to convey that. Okay, good enough. It's enough. All right. Thank you, Adam.
Can I just add something?
Yes, sure.
I see that,
Yes, I certainly agree that the word Islamophobia is a problematic word. I prefer racism against Muslims, actually, because the word Islamophobia is problematic, especially given its history. As you may know, it's a word that has been forged in the late 70s during the Iranian Revolution by the Mullah and the Ayatollah, who named Islamophobic people who were the dissidents and the enemy of the Islamic Revolution. In itself, the word is already loaded.
if you talk to the common man who's not a researcher, it is Islamophobia. People think that Islam itself it's not Muslims only. Of course, there's racism against Muslims and all kinds of.
Well, in that case, if there, but if there were to be some kind of a symmetry between it, I would prefer to compare Islamophobia with anti-Judaism than Islamophobia with anti-Semitism. Does it make any sense? I mean, I think anti-Judaism, which is very, very old, and I think we could agree at least on one thing, is that he's wrong on one thing, and I'm sure we're going to agree, is that he denies that anti-Semitism is a problem anymore, right? We can agree on that, I suppose. He thinks that anti-Semitism is you disagree? Okay.
I don't see it, because I think
Okay.
anti-Semitism is a problem.
Okay, so we agree on this. Good. All right. So this is the first type of problem that I see. All right. The other problem that came out. This one is funny. The other problem that came out is after Charlie Hebdo, there was this whole debate in France and beyond France that, well, wait a minute, we can insult Islam, we can insult the Prophet, we can represent him, and so on and so forth, which is an insult to a whole people, let's say to billion people and so on. But how is that we cannot talk about the Holocaust or be a Holocaust denier, for example? You know that in France there are laws, so I'm talking of France in particular, there are laws that ban Holocaust denial. In fact, all genocide denial, including slavery, etc., these are laws, memorial laws, they call them, all right? So how is that it's possible and it's even encouraged, and actually millions of people walk in the street to support people who offend and who insult Islam, and the state itself goes in the streets and, demonstrate in support of people who have offended Islam, and how is that we cannot say something about the Holocaust, put into question the 6 million dead of the Holocaust, etc. So that's for me the second big symbolic violence that has been perpetrated after Charlie Hebdo. Who can tell me why I think it is very problematic to make this parallel or this statement? Do you think I have sort of professional deformation because I ask questions to people? All right, that's okay. Do you see do you see an analogy between blasphemy and denial of a genocide? Do you think it belongs to the same realm of discourse, of history, etc.? Those two, no? Yes. Yes, that's an excellent question. The Jews are inherently the enemies of radical Islamists, right? Inherently. This is in their dogma, in their text. It's in the text by Qutb, who is one of the founders of Muslim Brotherhood, and so on and so forth. So this is, the Jew, it's not even a question of doing something. By the fact of being Jewish, you're already inherently an enemy, correct? So that would explain the kosher grocery store. Now, for the Charlie Hebdo, they did something, right? They did something which is deemed blasphemous, and therefore they were quote unquote punished for that deed. So you see the difference between an action that leads to a retribution, right, and being Jewish, which is enough to be thought as someone who is an enemy who has to be eliminated. I think that there is, of course, a distinction there. And actually, Charlie Hebdo journalists thought of themselves as resistants. You know that, right? They were doing some resistance because they had been intimidated and threatened so many times over the years. And what's his name? The main, the director, the one who was killed, forgot his name. Well, the most famous one. It escapes me now. But anyway, so so those journalists saw themselves as doing something dangerous. They knew perfectly well that they were doing something dangerous, as opposed to the clients of the kosher grocery store who was just doing some grocery, but because they were Jewish was enough to be attacked, right? So I think here there is, yes.
Maybe there was no connection.
Yes.
One was the result of an organized plan.
Sure.
Right?
Both were organized.
Was,
No, it was both organized, yeah.
okay, so the other one was just typical teenage.
No, they were both organized. They were actually in cahoot. This has been shown. No, really. Yeah, yes. No, I agree. And there was this, there was this question, the one that you just asked, which is, thank you very much, which is, in fact, in reverse, your question, but in reverse. The question was, why the journalist, as opposed to why the Jews, as though, Jews, it's obvious that, yes, go ahead.
That's the problem, I think.
Well, I also think that when you say it's one event, Sophie, I think that attacking free speech, and it's attacking the French Republic, right, or what the Republic stands for. And if you attack, and very often, people who have attacked the Republic have attacked the Jews. If you think of the Dreyfus affair, for example, or if you think of what happened during the collaboration, when the Republic is being attacked, and when Jews are being attacked, the Republic, and actually that's exactly how Manuel Valls, French Prime Minister, interpreted this. knowing, very consciously that when Jews are in danger, it's all of the French Republic that has to respond to that. You said I have only 3 minutes? Okay. Well, okay. And you? Sure. Okay, very good. All right. So, okay. So what I wanted to say about the difference between blasphemy and Holocaust denial, not that I am favorable to the laws banning Holocaust denial. Actually, I am not favorable to those French laws. But I see very well the distinction between blasphemy, which is putting into question and mocking a revealed truth as opposed to mocking historical truth. And I think that we've got two very, very different situations of discourse, right? One is the revealed truth is that Moses received the commandments from God, and you can make as much fun of it as possible because it's obviously not historical fact. And the other one is something that not only is history, but it also is slanderous. When you think of the millions of people who are being slandered, right, by Holocaust deniers, it's actually an argument that was made by a historian that Holocaust denial, ban on Holocaust denial could be justified based on law against slander, right? Because you slander all the historians who write and who have done research on the Holocaust. You slander all the witnesses, the survivors, etc., etc. So I think it's a very, very different thing, and you cannot make an analogy. Okay, and I would say that those two operations, one, replacement of anti-Semitism with Islamophobia, and the other, equating somehow blasphemy with Holocaust denial, result in a symbolic violence wherewith the Jews are bereft of a history of persecution and genocide. And Jewish history is, in a way, being hijacked and being stolen from them. So it's not just the physical attacks, it's not just the physical threat against Jews, it's also a symbolic way of bereaving and depriving a whole community of a certain sense of identity and of recognition of its past history. Okay? Well, I will stop here. And
why don't you just skip through the slides? Alan's excited about all of
you wanted another slide?
So just like kind of show everyone the slides. Here it is.
Yes. So no one has heard of Emmanuel Todd. He was very famous for at least 1 month in France when he published couple of months. I don't remember exactly. It was just several months after the Charlie massacre. Published this book entitled "Who is Charlie?" And his argument is very bizarre. He's a demographer. And so he thinks that his science is going to prove, and actually it was completely disproved by experts, but it doesn't matter. His speculation, if you will, is that the people who demonstrated by the millions, I don't know how many millions, but several millions, in the streets of Paris and of France in general after Charlie Hebdo were actually people who were the old anti-Semites, Catholic, recycled into Islamophobes and anti-Muslims, and that in fact they were in the name of some kind of defense of secularism and laicite and French anti-religion, blah, 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 anti-clericalism, that they were actually hiding and concealing an old unconscious or old history of anti-Semitism, bigotry, and now, of course, Islamophobia. So that was a very interesting moment as well after Charlie. Okay, I will, yes, I know I have to.
Skip to the last slide, and then we have
Why do you want me to skip to the last slide? You like the last slide?
Yeah, I do. Just so they can.
Which one?
Yes, I don't know. This looks great. Okay, so we have time for a few questions.
Oh, you've heard of Michel Houellebecq? Everybody has heard of this strange, very strange. So Houellebecq. So the day of Charlie attacks, it flows in all the bookstores in France, his book. And his book is published the very same day of the attacks. And his novel is entitled Submission, which already is politically incorrect because it reminds of the movie, the notorious movie that resulted in the death of Van Gogh in Holland, right? A movie that was made with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who is hiding in America after this thing, about criticizing Islam treatment of women or Muslim treatment of women, submission. Anyway, so this book, the plot of the book is in 2022, France will be an Islamic republic after a civil war between the far right or the neo-populist or the neo-nationalist and the Islamists. So it's also a very, very interesting book. And he has a Jewish moment in that book. There is the character of Miriam, who happens to be the only nice and non-caricatural character of this satire or this fable. And Miriam is Jewish, and she says, I'm going to leave to Israel because I cannot stay in a France, caught in a vice between Islamists on the one hand and fascist or far right on the other hand. And then she goes to Israel, and the main character, François, who is some kind of a figure of Welbeck, the writer, says, well, where can we go? We don't have any Israel to go, we French people. So that's something that gives you an idea of that. Okay, thank you very much. He has lost all his teeth, but he is still very biting, if I may. Very biting satirist. So in the particular context of French modern history, I will tell you that Jews emblematize the success of, not the economic success or business or whatever, but the success of the unity of the French Republic, because the Jews were first emancipated in 1792 during the Revolution, right? And they are the first people who have been emancipated and given all the rights of citizen. So I would say that in that very sense, the Jews embody what the French Republic think in terms of equality of all its citizens. So I think it's very important in a way that when Jews are under attack, it's the very idea of this Republican equality experience that is putting into question. And it was the case during the Dreyfus affair. The forces against Dreyfus were the anti-Republican forces, people who were counter-revolutionary, anti-Republican, and so on. The forces of Vichy were forces against the French Republic as well. Fascist France, etc., etc. So I think it's interesting to see that. And the forces now that attack Jews are obviously forces that attack the French Republic as well, and it's Islamic radicalism. Well, Catholic zombie is this idea that Catholicism, in a way, is dead, right? In France, in modern France or postmodern France, which is not true. I'm not embracing that, but I'm saying that this is his view, and that there is un vieux fond. How do you say that in English? Un vieux fond, an old reservoir at the unconscious level of Catholic bigotry and anti-Judaism, etc., etc. So that's this. In a way, you see an illustration of that very well in Welbeck's novel, where the main character, François, is trying to convert desperately to Catholicism, right? And he kneels like in Pascal, pensée. He kneels, he tries to do his best in order to believe, but the faith does not come to him. He's the perfect Catholic zombie, if you will, right? He's trying to find some meaning, and the meaning in postmodernity has completely disappeared. And that's the reason why, in the novel at least, he accepts to submit to the new Islamic faith, which he sees as much more compelling, much stronger than this, what he sees as an archaic form of meaning.